Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. It is 3:01 Pacific Standard Time, 6:01 Eastern Time. My name is Kristen Hassen. I'm the Director of Pima Animal Care Center in Tucson, Arizona, soon to be the Director of American Pets Alive, working alongside Dr. Jefferson to lead the Human Animal Support Services Project and the other AMPA initiatives. We're here today to talk more about human animal support services. We are about 6 months into the project and so much has happened. We have more than 550 experts helping with this project now, and more than 30 pilot shelters trying all of the new things that we're doing to help keep animals and people together during this challenging time. You have submitted a number of questions, but you can submit more by using the Q&A function during the webinar. So you can submit those questions and we'll do our best to get to them all today. Any questions that we don't get to today, we will start with next time we see you. And so please ask away, and we are going to go ahead and get started with that. So we're going to have the executive committee members introduce themselves on their first question, but you're sitting here with the executive committee, or part of it, of the Human Animal Support Services Project. And the first question is for Diaz. Diaz, you actually ran an animal shelter at one point and have some experience in this field, but that's not what you do today. So tell us a little bit about where you started, what you do now, and how that relates to your involvement with this project.
Oh, that's funny, Kristen. So it's great to be here. Early when I was a kid, I worked at an animal hospital and knew that for a long time I was pushing and thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. So that was not the direction that school ended up taking me, and I ended up getting my master's degree in counseling and worked in the human service field for quite a bit of time before getting the opportunity to run the Nevada Humane Society. And that was a fantastic experience. It was, as I was going into it, I expected it to be a dream job. And I found that there were many of the same difficulties that are also in the human service world that are in the animal welfare world. I quickly understood that efficiency is probably the most misunderstood concept along, like as it is in human services, as it was working in animal welfare. And I'm no longer in that world anymore, but fortunately, HASS has given me the opportunity to be pulled back in. Now I'm working, I'm the CEO of Eddie House, which is a homeless youth shelter. And there are a lot of similarities at the same time, because here I am still doing shelter work, only in the two-legged world versus the four-legged world. And there are so many pieces that are similar. And it is the opportunity to sit on this committee gives me the chance to continue to learn, continue to grow, and be even better in the services that I'm delivering here, but also recognizing where these two worlds can meld. There's a lot of places where there's great benefit for both. And I think that having conversation about how social services and animal welfare can continue to work together, it's a win-win. And I get to sit in the driver's seat with some beautiful minds in figuring out how to problem solve with a number of these things, and continuing to listen and learn from all the great people out there who are interactive with HASS. So this is a great place to be. I'm super excited to always bring my perspective to the solution-driven committee that this is.
Thank you, Diaz. So you work with young people every day who don't really maybe have immediate connections in the world to take care of them. Do you think a little bit about, do you ever think about how HASS could impact the young people that you work with?
I do. And, you know, just in this short time that I've been on the committee at HASS, we have started some new directives internally. So the youth that we work with are ages 18 to 24. A number of these kids have aged out of foster care. Some have had just some really bad circumstances that have happened to them, episodic homelessness where maybe their parents died, maybe there was some mental health along the way. One of the things that we're finding that's working really well is actually bringing animals into the shelter. And where some of these kids have not been coming out of their shell, they're looking forward to the opportunities where we've got a couple of groups bringing animals in. We also now have a couple of kids that have come to us where before we probably wouldn't allow them to bring their animals in. And now we're finding ways for them to be able to keep their bond and keep their animal, keep possession of their loved ones, their pets. And we're finding that we're able to connect with them even more so. It's tough to be homeless all together, but if you have a bond, we have to make sure that we're not a part of the barriers and creating more difficulties by breaking those bonds.
Thank you so much. This project is all about keeping families together, and I want to turn now to Gina Knapp, another executive committee member. Gina, you have said that your sole purpose in life is to increase the national return to owner rate, to get lost pets home. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to making that really your life's purpose and life's work, and how you think that could look if HASS is successful?
Well, a year ago tomorrow, I started working for the Michelson Found Animals Foundation after retiring as the manager of the Front Street Animal Shelter at the city of Sacramento. And looking back on my 10-year career at Front Street, the thing that I got the most excitement out of, there were a lot of things obviously, but when it came to the animals was watching when the person arrived and the animal realized that their person was there for them. There was just so much joy in that. And the stars aligned, and Michelson's mission is keeping people and animals together, found animals, of course. And we came to an agreement, and they made me their National Shelter Engagement Director, which is such a fancy title. But seriously, my primary focus is increasing the national return to owner rate, and now maybe the international one, since HASS has spread its wings beyond the borders of the United States. So I can talk about this all day, but I'm going to whip through what success would look like if we actually accomplish that which we hope to do, and that's getting most lost pets, all lost pets, back home to their families. And I always say this too, I'll probably be unemployed, but that would be okay too. I think that all shelter personnel and volunteers will speak RTO language. I frequently say that, do you speak RTO? Meaning, is it it'll be an organizational priority, kind of an integral part of the culture that supersedes adoption, transfer, rescue. It will be number one, not number 7, which it has been for a very long time. Not intentionally, but the past is the past, and we have to look to the future. I think all of our websites will be robust, actionable, easy to understand, with information that people who either lose a pet or find a lost animal can use. We're going to enter the 21st century, and most of us, many of us already have, but lost and found information will be tech driven. They won't be sitting in dusty binders in a lobby. Lost and found reports, that collect dust and no one looks at, but instead capitalize on technology to facilitate reunion. I think our field services officers will be the heroes, truly the divine heroes that will drive pets back home where they belong instead of bringing them to an animal shelter. People that have pets and love them will understand the value and the importance of pet identification. ID tags and currently registered microchips will be the norm, kind of like how we all wear seat belts today, right? That concept was developed in the 1960s, and a lot of people objected, but guess what? We're all wearing seat belts today. So I think that in our future, where this is 100% successful, all pets will have current ID tags and current microchips. People that love animals everywhere will know what to do when they find a lost animal. The shelter will be a last resort, not a first resort. People will immediately be able to find resources on tools and strategies to help a lost animal get back home safely and quickly, and we'll be there to help them if they need that help. And also, if someone loses an animal, and that information is readily available, they're no longer frantic. They know exactly what to do, where to look, and who to ask for help. And we will be those helpers. Length of stay is going to plummet and costs are going to go down. And we'll be tracking RTO data to determine if there's something further that we can do for that specific animal so it doesn't have to become lost again. And I think the best thing of all, I promise to stop now, is that more lives will be saved, period.
Gina, do you think that my partner and I found a lost dog the other day and it had a collar and tag on, and we were able to get it home in like 10 minutes, and that wouldn't have been possible without that old-fashioned tool. Do you think we're going to see sort of a combined strategy using microchips and collars and tags, or do you think one strategy will sort of take over the others?
You know, that's a good question. I do think, you know, the microchips kind of disrupted, right? Lost animals, if you will. I think that in the next decade, we're going to see whatever that next thing is. But for now, I think there are multiple things, safeguards that we can be using, and ID tags and currently registered chips are the way to go.
Thank you. We're going to turn now to Chetana, Chetana, you got involved in this project and are in so many ways. Could you talk a little bit about yourself, but also your involvement with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee? We think this project is fundamentally different than anything that's come before it. And one of the reasons is that this group exists and is so influential in this project. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the DEI committee?
Sure. Well, thank you, Kristen, for the opportunity. I currently work for Life of Riley at Spring Point, which is a funder in the companion animal welfare space. So I've gotten to know a lot of you in that role. But previously, I worked internationally. So I've spent most of my career working on animal welfare issues, specifically farm animal welfare, in Asia, in Europe, in Latin America, in Africa. And this issue of the lack of diversity in our movement has come up everywhere across the world, right? So like, even if you look at a place like South Africa, you see that the animal welfare movement and the environmental movement are predominantly white. We don't, even in South Africa. And so certainly that's an issue that we've had here in the US as well, is that our space is just missing a lot of voices. And I think what's been really kind of game changing about the HASS movement is that in this moment when there is increased conversation, especially in the US, about diversity and equity and inclusion in all of our spaces, including in animal welfare, I think what HASS does differently is doesn't just talking about serving BIPOC communities or serving marginalized communities. HASS really talks about the importance of these communities leading the movement and really understanding that these voices are needed to solve some of our most complex animal welfare problems. But we don't, as a movement, we don't have those voices at the table yet. And I think that's what's kind of magical about the DEI committee. It's kind of coming together, but something really special happens when you bring leaders from BIPOC communities and other underrepresented communities to the table every week together. So, you know, it feels really different to be the only person of color at a table, which has been my experience throughout much of my career in animal welfare. But then you bring a group of leaders together and you really start to understand by kind of sharing our lived experiences as professionals in the animal welfare space and just what we've seen and what we've been able to pick up on. You really start to see some solutions emerge and some commonalities that we can kind of use as a movement to make our space more diverse. And I think it's just a really powerful room or a Zoom room to be in. There's a lot of exciting conversations happening there.
Do you think that when we talk about sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion being an advisory group and in a leadership role over this project, how do you think that's different than, say, inviting BIPOC people to a meeting that you're having? How do you feel like the dynamic that we're creating is different than maybe other efforts to be, quote, inclusive?
So I think the difference in terms of what we're trying to achieve is to have that lens on every aspect of the work that HASS does. Every piece of the work that the working groups do or that the participating shelters do is to have that DEI lens, as opposed to it just being this side thing, right? And so we're doing, you know, we're working on adoptions, we're working on fostering, we're working on, you know, we're working on RTO, and then we're also working on DEI issues. It's very different from we're working on fostering, we're working on adoptions, we're working on RTO, and we're doing it all from the lens of, you know, how to bet, you know, of bringing in the ideas of diverse communities to all of those solutions. So it's a really, you know, it's a really different way of looking at the problem.
Thank you so much. I want to turn now to Dr. Jefferson. Dr. Jefferson, you have spent a 20-some year career trying to end the needless killing of healthy, treatable, and otherwise savable animals in animal shelters. How did you come to this idea that we have to do something, I guess, on the front end from where you have been previously?
Hi. I'm Ellen Jefferson, and I'm the executive director of Austin Pets Alive and American Pets Alive, and on the exec team, obviously, for HASS. And my entire career has been sort of circular in that I became a veterinarian so that I could help animals when they needed help. And after my first year of being out of veterinary school, I moved to Austin and was volunteering at our local shelter. And I did it on a whim, really, because I didn't have any friends in Austin. I didn't do it necessarily to make this my life move. But what I found out is that there were so many animals. That was back when the city was taking in 30,000 animals a year, and 85% of them were being euthanized. And I didn't feel like I could help with live release at all. I felt like I had to do something to stop the flow of animals into the shelter. So I actually founded a low-cost spay and neuter clinic and thought I could whip out as many spays and neuters as possible and nip this in the bud. And 10 years later, we were still euthanizing 55% of the animals coming into our shelter. And so I changed tracks completely from prevention and jumped back into working within the shelter and trying to get the animals out alive. And I think that back then in 2008, when I made that transition, I didn't think it was possible to do both. I didn't think it was possible to focus on prevention and focus on live outcomes at the same time. It felt too big. And I think what's happening now after 10 years of focusing on just live outcomes, that it's circling back around to this point that they are connected, and the solution has to be both pieces at once. And focusing on just one or the other only gets us so far. But if we can actually focus on both together and not lose sight of the importance of each one in their own right, that we can be much more successful as an industry. And I think that was what always worried me about the prevention side, is that it seemed to be at the expense of the live outcomes and vice versa. And I think now we're finally at a place where we can talk about both, and it's safe to talk about both, and we can come together with solutions that really try to leverage both pieces and be successful.
I want to follow up with a question from last week, which we didn't get to, which is, why not, instead of all of this trying to keep families together, why not just continue to focus on large-scale spay and neuter efforts and stop pet overpopulation instead of doing all of the HASS efforts?
Is that for me or for anybody? Okay. I think that the problem with just focusing on spay neuter is that it's not specific enough. It's a giant hammer for something that we have a whole lot of nails, and we need to really be understanding what each of those nails mean and applying a small hammer to each one. And so if we have this giant hammer, it's not going to solve everything we think it's going to solve. And one way to look at that is that when you look at the animals coming into the shelters, if it was only overpopulation, we would be drowning in puppies. And I know some communities do have a lot of puppies, but our community doesn't. And a lot of the communities in Texas don't. Their puppies aren't the problem. The adult animals coming into the shelter are the problem. And when you look at it with that lens, that means that we have a relinquishment problem or a lost and found problem, because those animals, they're not suffering because there weren't enough homes. They had a home. They were growing up somewhere. They got to be an adult somewhere, and then something happened. And so if we can address the something that's happening, then we can be more successful in keeping those animals out of the shelter. And I think the other problem with mass spay neuter is that it's not targeted to the animals that we may need the most help with population control. And I think that we need to collect data to understand where we actually need population control, if we need population control, and then start putting those resources in a targeted way so that we're making the biggest impact with the work that we're doing. Every activity is resulting in some sort of measurable impact, which we don't really have the mechanism to do that right now.
Thank you. This next question is a tough one, and it comes from someone that joined us a couple of weeks ago. They said, I desperately want to start a community program, but we have no resources and can barely keep up with our work at the shelter. Where should we start, and can HASS help an organization like ours? And this is for anyone that wants to take it.
That feels like a Gina question.
Can you repeat the question for me?
We are desperate to start a community program at our shelter, but we don't have the resources and we can barely keep up with the work inside the shelter. Does HASS have a way to help communities like ours, or do you have any advice for a community like ours on how to get started?
All sorts of ideas. Well, for example, if we went to a more foster-centric model and there are fewer animals in the shelter, chewing up all of the time, then you have some bandwidth that you didn't have before. I'm a firm believer in just do it, figure it out, find a way, make it happen, practice, pilot, whatever you want to call it. You can't do it all, do a piece of it, one bite at a time, just like you eat an elephant. I don't know that I have a better answer than that. Desire, opportunity, and ability. I know you have it, so start.
Thank you. So the next question is another question we received, which is, if you're doing all of this work to keep animals out of the shelter and you're focusing on the community, doesn't that take away from the efforts that are happening in the shelter? So it's sort of related to the first question, but maybe just sort of a bigger picture version of that.
I'll start. If you have fewer animals in the shelter and the ones that truly need to be there are there, I think it's just logical that those animals will get more of our attention, more staff time, more behavior modification, a peaceful, more quiet environment. So it makes sense to me, and I think it's what's in the best interest of those animals too.
Yeah, and I can add to that. I think that it's, and Diaz, looks like Diaz was going to say something too, but I would just say that one way to start and to tackle that without feeling like you're giving up anything is to think about the steps you can take right at the beginning of your interaction with that animal. And is there a little bit of time you could take off of the back end and put it on the front end? And I think what we're understanding is that 15 minutes of knocking on doors and hanging up signs for your animal control officers, if they're picking up animals, rather than it might be faster for the animal control officer to take all those animals in and bring them to the shelter, but think how much time we invest in that animal after it enters the shelter. That 15 minutes on the front end might be well worth it to shift some duties around so that those people have more time to do that little bit of outreach. And we're finding data, hopefully Dallas will be able to share very soon, but they've found data that the large majority of the dogs that have been returned to owner were within one city block of their home when they were found and picked up by animal control. And so imagine the impact we could make on intake if we could just spend that 10-15 minutes per animal before it gets put on the truck and before it gets brought into the shelter.
And the other thing that I want to add is, I talked a little bit earlier about efficiency. Oftentimes when we're thinking about efficiency, we're thinking about cutting budgets or oftentimes scrimping on quality. if this gives us more time to spend on the animals that are in the shelter, we're going to be able to solve other problems that we're not even paying attention to. It's going to really give us the opportunity to have more quality of services, which is going to result in a better quality of life for the animals that we're tending to. So in the big picture, it's not, I don't like to look at it as it's just a pie and we're taking away pieces, but it's really looking at how do we approach this from a couple of different angles, still, doing what we have to do by all means, but efficiency adds to true quality at the end of the day.
Thank you. So another question that we've received in a couple of different varieties is, you're asking people to hold stray animals or lost animals that they've found, and you're asking people to rehome their own pets in some cases and help be part of the rehoming process. Isn't this putting an awfully big burden on people that have busy lives and kids and jobs and a whole bunch of other things? Isn't the job of the shelter just to be there to accept animals that need to come in?
Well, I'd like to start on this one. I mean, I think we're fooling ourselves if we don't believe or don't know that private members of our communities have been finding lost animals forever and ever without our intervention. And as we've done some research, most recently, we're finding that a private person has a much higher return to owner rate than we do in most cases. So wow, right? An epiphany. So why wouldn't we want to encourage more people to help us do the very thing that they're better at than we are? It also offers us opportunities to have conversations with these folks about chipping in ID tags and spaying and neutering, and they become our vocal champions in our community as they reunite the pets with their families. So I think it's more of embracing what's already happening and becoming a part of that solution versus sitting over here with our blinders on, pretending like it's not occurring. I view it as a really great opportunity, and people want to help us. They just do. People are good. Most people are good. And I think joining in partnership with our community is the right way to go. We'll have that many more voices out there helping us do our work.
I'll add on to that. I also think that it just changes the culture around animals within our communities. And it creates this culture of animal welfare within our communities by making kind of the job of taking care of animals, not just about the shelter. The shelter will still play that role, but also allowing the community to kind of take on that role. And as Gina said, it just increases the number of active advocates and informed advocates that we have for animals in our community. So I think it just makes our community stronger as a whole. It doesn't take anything away from them.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. I think that we have created a system where people are blind to being able to help. And we've done that on purpose because we wanted control, the shelter industry wanted control of the animals that were lost so that they could be reunited. But that was before the internet, and that was before we had all these things that make it so much easier to connect and network and to help each other do the right thing. And so we have to kind of walk it back and figure out how we now let people be part of the solution, and we give them enough information to be able to be helpful. Like Gina said, people want to help, and our job is to let them help. And I don't mean passively just pass the job off to them and say, good luck. It's more about creating the resources that make people successful in doing what they want to do to help animals not have to go to a shelter, help animals not have to go to a shelter where they might get sick and die, or they might die because of space. And I know that's not every shelter's problem in the country, but it is in a lot of shelters. And I wanted to share that in Austin, when we were looking at this and trying to think how does the regular public, not the animal welfare people, but the regular public, how do they navigate getting a lost animal home? It's impossible. There's no coordinated information anywhere. It all directs you back to the shelter. And so we have to figure out how to get the information out of our heads and into a digestible format and mass communicated out there so that people can know as much as we know and be able to help. And that's just one piece. I think we have to support in a lot more ways than that, but that's a big piece of it.
Thank you. So the next question, I'll start with an example from our shelter to introduce it. We really were skeptical that the pet retention programs we were doing, the Keeping Families Together programs, could work as well as we wanted them to. And as we track data, for instance, last month of 400 people that called to surrender their animals, 75% of them were able to end up keeping their own pet, and only 25% needed to surrender. We were really excited about that, but the question is related. If you're successful in keep animals out, how do you ensure those animals are actually getting the care they need, that they're getting spayed and neutered, vaccinated, and that they are being appropriately cared for?
I think we have a lot of growing to do in the way that we support that type of activity. This is all happening in the last 6 months, and our databases and software that has been created to basically keep tabs on the inventory in the shelter doesn't help us when we don't own the animals and we don't take them into our custody. And so I think that we need to have sort of a what do you call it, a renaissance of software development that helps us really have our fingers into what's happening in the community, so we can give people the resources that they need to do those things for a found animal or for an animal they're trying to rehome, but then also have targeted activities that help to hone in on the ones that may be missing that, and that we want to make sure that are receiving the services that we would offer to them if they did come through the shelter system. And we have no capability of doing that right now. And so I think that's why it feels so murky, is because it is, but I think people can keep track in spreadsheets for now, do callbacks on people that are contacting the shelter, and just wing it until we get a more specific solution in place.
Thank you. The next question is coming in through our Q&A. How do animal shelters pay for temporarily housing the pets of families or people who've been evicted or people who are in unsafe relationships?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I did that frequently at the shelter when I was the manager. I think now we're poised, if we have more animals in foster, we have the space and the ability to provide that interim temporary housing to keep an animal safe while their person is seeking safety. It shouldn't cost any more if we're really implementing the tenets of HASS and keeping our daily population at a manageable place. And the people that need our service, they're taxpayers too. So, and if you're a government funded shelter, perhaps that is something that's going to be weaved into the budget, a line item in the budget that so much is allocated, because we're definitely, I can only speak for the few shelters that I talked to directly, but there's been a substantial cost savings during COVID. So instead of giving up those budgets, let's repurpose that money for the betterment of people and their animals.
Yes, and this is a great question, and it's one of those practical questions that we've been answering. And one of the things about HASS is that we were talking this morning about how really we are a project and a learning laboratory, and we have more than 500 subject matter experts thinking through these new challenges we're facing. And if you're a person that really needs answers to how-to questions, we have every Monday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have calls where we just talk through these day-to-day issues we're facing as we enter this new world. We also have webinars every Wednesday, and for leadership, there's calls every Friday, and so we'll share the links to that. But there's a lot of places where we're talking through these problems, and we also have 36 working groups. So I want to turn it back to Dr. Jefferson to talk a little bit about 36 working groups sounds like a lot. Can you tell us a little bit about who is in these working groups and what are they doing?
Yes, so the working groups are amazing. We have just amazing people participating in them, and it's generally people working in shelters from at all levels, and also industry professionals that are involved in funding, or software companies, or even pet food. It's all over the map. People who specialize in transport. And we need all of those brains to come together, because the reason that we have 35 is we have identified 35 areas that need basically a think tank to solve the problems that are in that one small area of animal welfare and prevents progress as a whole. And so those groups are working on their one small area and trying to solve problems like we just got off of a call with our organizational development working group, and really trying to puzzle through, sorry, my dog's gonna bark here in a second, trying to puzzle through what is the right, sorry, somebody else jump in temporarily.
Yeah, that's okay. So the working groups are trying to solve all of the big questions, and we're discussing really hard to talk about things at times. We're talking about no kill versus traditional sheltering, and the tension between the different parts of the spectrum of the movement, and how that may hold us back as we try to do HASS. We're talking about what it means to collaborate when we don't always agree with each other, something that's really been hard for the movement to do up to this point. And we're also talking about very practical things. How do you take an animal from intake and put it into a foster home within hours instead of within days or weeks? And what does that do to your overall length of stay? And so the working groups are all designed to tackle really the biggest, hardest questions that could be barriers to the overall success of this really monumental shift already happening in the movement. And I want to turn really quickly back to Chetana, because Chetana, you work in other spaces where you're trying to make big changes with how, I guess, society is trying to grapple with a problem. Can you talk a little bit about how your other work maybe relates to this idea that we're going to create this like big shift and how people think about a societal problem?
Yeah, I mean, the most challenging part of it is when you're taking on a big societal problem, you have to bring all of the voices in society into it. And it's really tempting to just kind of, a couple of us have been working on a certain issue for like 20 or 30 years. And it's like really tempting to just sit down and say, we're just going to solve this because we know the inside and outside of this. But we don't, because we may not represent all of the lived experiences of society. And so when you try to integrate more voices into the conversation, it gets really messy, and it's hard because we don't always know how to talk to each other. And we don't always agree with each other. And so kind of working through these human relationship and communication challenges, I think, is the hardest part of any of this work. And I think that is actually what's really great about HASS, is that kind of just recognizing, it's like a group of people who recognizes that these conversations are going to be really, really hard. And the more we have to bring more people into the table, because these are big societal problems that impact every community and every person. So we have to get representatives of every community to the table. And when we do that, the conversation just becomes harder and messier. But just the willingness to take that on, I think, is what's really, it's just so critical and so important.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that, we are hopefully at a place where we can start sharing. I know one of the questions was about sharing what the working groups end products are and what the outcomes of them are. And I think that one reason it's taken so long to get to that place where we can share a lot more is just because these conversations are so hard and they're so multi-layered, and it really is like peeling an onion. You know, you peel one little piece and then just more starts coming off and more starts coming off and more starts coming off. And it really is illustrative of why we found it so intractable to make permanent change in our industry. And I know we've made leaps and bounds changes, improvements to the system, but really specific changes are difficult to come by. Sustainability about moving towards a future is hard to come by. Finding leaders committed to this and filling leadership positions it's incredibly hard. All of these things are there. All these hardships are there because we have so much to work out and to solve for. And if we can start solving that and we can check off a few of these problems, then the future is going to be that much easier to navigate. And things like industry toxicity and being attacked on the internet and sides feeling like they can't have civil conversations because neither one can be heard. If we can start knocking that out so that we can have better, more productive conversations, that's a win-win. And I think up until now, we've never had the space to just talk about it in real time and not always feel like we're in defense mode, if that makes sense.
And Ellen, can people get involved in the working group still? And how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Bobby shared the link to the list of working groups, and hopefully he can, I know that he's always willing to take inquiries if people would like to join them. There's the working groups, I think are fascinating, and we need more help in a lot of them. We've identified that we have potentially a lot to do, and whether it's retrieving information from people in the industry or looking through data to try to figure out what's actually happening versus what's in the database. And there's a lot of work to do. So we could absolutely use more help.
So we haven't talked a lot about the elements of HASS, and the elements are really where the whole project kind of started, yet they're the really grounded practices that people can do. And the pilot shelters and others who aren't involved in the pilot are showing us that they work. I shared one success metric, but we are gathering dozens and dozens of success metrics and stories of people that have been helped that never would have been before. How do you all as the executive committee, we started with these 12 elements that were these volunteer programs, foster-centric model, pet support center, remote services. How do those relate to these kind of higher level things that we're talking about today? We're talking a lot of big picture change today, but how do they relate to these actual elements, and where do the elements even come from?
I remember when we first started this, what we called them guiding principles, 10 commandments. We had all sorts of names for them. And then suddenly they morphed into elements. And yeah, they're very specific and focused. And it's almost like a volcano happened, right? It evolved into this enormous opportunity for conversation, exchange of ideas. I mean, I always say COVID was the best thing that ever happened to this industry. Hundreds of people on a weekly basis, sometimes multiple times a week, having continuous, deep, meaningful conversations, digging deep into the work that we do so that we can be better for it and have a better way of caring for animals and the people in our society. I feel like I've digressed. Somebody take this.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say one of the things that ties it all together is that I think it's kind of shifted a narrative in a little bit. All of these elements towards, we take care of entire families. So we're not just about taking care of the animal or just rescuing the animal. We take care of the entire family, and that is the best way to take care of the animal. And just empowering more people to care for animals and to love animals and to be a part of their lives.
Yeah, and I really see the elements as being the end result of what we do. Like that's going to be the pieces that are lasting forever, is that instead of being kennel centric, we're going to be foster centric. and it's going to describe our future, where there's government support, where we're using evidence to make decisions, where we have intake to placement pathways that are built out, and people know what we mean when we say that. And I think that's in my brain, that's how the elements are the end product of the storming that we're going through right now, storming and forming.
Dias?
And I think that this gives us an opportunity to truly be change agents in meeting people where they are, not necessarily having a cookie cutter approach because we've always done it this way, it needs to stay this way. And when you do that and it's more individualistic, you're taking in considerations that we all come from different types of backgrounds. There are different cultural relevances that have to, how we view our pets. And it's an opportunity for us to educate and be able to get into the homes of people we probably haven't traditionally got into those particular homes. What's great about this committee at the same time is even with the social injustice, unrest that's going on in our country today, we're able to navigate and continue to talk about how we're problem solving throughout all of this and how it impacts all of our worlds.
I want to ask you all a question that has come to us a couple of times, and it's a little bit, it might seem a little bit off the wall, but here goes. When you think about what volunteer programs could look like under HASS, how different they could be, and how they could actually relate to other partnerships you might have in the community, what do you think like the future of volunteer programs have been so static? They've been walking dogs, doing adoptions, helping clean up. What could change? Like I think volunteer roles could fundamentally change in shelters. What do you see, just from your own lens, what do you see happening with volunteer programs under the HASS model?
Gina, you go first. Your hand was up.
That darn mute button always gets me, I forget. I think sky's the limit on this one. I see volunteers managing and leading RTO programs if there aren't enough shelter staff to do it. I see volunteers being like super Uber people that pick up pets that don't have another way to get to the clinic for either a well check or a spay and neuter. I see volunteers, oh my goodness. Well, I am a firm believer that there isn't anything volunteers can't and shouldn't be doing except for maybe operating on an animal, unless they're a licensed veterinarian, and obviously euthanasia, but everything else is on the table. We have to remind ourselves too that a lot of our volunteers are a whole lot smarter than we are and far more capable than we are. And bringing them in and embracing them to do the work of HASS, well, we'd be foolish if we did otherwise. Go ahead, Diaz.
I see volunteers. I love what you said. I shouldn't have followed you, Gina. I should have went first. Don't ever follow Gina Nepp when you're talking. But from a social service standpoint, I can see volunteers being organizations or working along with social service, human service organizations. You know, when animals and pets are coming in, perhaps there's a group home that will be the place where that pet is housed until we can figure out more information so they're continuing to be loved on and receive attention as opposed to necessarily being in a kennel for a while before their owner is found. I see volunteers being conduits of conversation with social service programs, to shelters, to veterinarian clinics, and being able to serve in those capacities that are really, really rewarding. And it gives them an opportunity to be firsthand witnesses of reunification or just love being given to animals.
We haven't talked a lot about the, Dias, I think I'm really glad you introduced this because we haven't talked a lot today about partnerships, but At our shelter, for example, we started a work study program, a federal work study program, which was people that received funding to actually come and work in the shelter. And it brought in this whole new vibrant, excited energy and so many amazing ideas. It really brought just so much to the workplace and really changed our workplace. We also have a work program for women who are experiencing homelessness, who come in and in partnership, they're helping fulfill our mission, but also being paid for that. Is there a place for partnerships where we can actually support people who are marginalized or people who are students and are learning? Is there sort of a middle ground where we have this middle space between full-time employees and volunteers and can build HASS programs through these kind of partnerships?
Yes, I'll try not to be too long. I think that there is an enormous amount of space to build in this particular capacity programming for all shelters. And it's a great opportunity it's a total win-win when you're talking about bringing other organizations together. I'll give an example. When I ran Nevada Humane Society, we started partnering with an organization called Life Changes. Life Changes gave our volunteers, and our volunteers would vet the Life Changes facilities. And then we placed animals who were waiting for their surgery or they couldn't go on the floor yet in those particular organizations. What would happen at the end is the people didn't want to give the animals back, but the animals came back just ready to with continued love. And they became volunteers as well because they wanted to be more involved with the shelter itself. So there is space, and there are so many wins that happen, not only from the adoption perspective or the reunification perspective, but from the human side. And in the meantime, all the clients who are participating in the services of Life Changes were getting therapy from the pets themselves.
So if we are successful and we end up, I mean, we've talked a lot about big success metrics. What would nationally success look like? And we've talked about reducing intake to the animals that really need to be entering the shelter. Of course, the shelters are going to be there. There are animals that need them. But if we were able to reduce intake into the kennels by half, if we were able to keep 3 million animals out, we could better serve the animals that are in the shelter. But then the question comes in, and this has come up a few times from people who are running government shelters, what if that leads to an argument that we just don't need the budgets we have? We don't need those funds because we're getting fewer animals. What would your response be to that question?
I think that leads to why it is so critically important that we keep track of the services that we're providing to our community. If I could rewind my own tape and go back to Front Street, one of the things I regret not having done was really keeping good data on how many people we helped and how many animals we helped and what services, what product we provided, because that tells a very big story. And with, we're facing mass evictions, we're in an economic crazy time, our work will still be needed. It will just be different. And I think that this fear that we don't need to exist, my dog's going crazy now, we don't need to exist, or that government shelters budget should be dwarfed. That's not the case, but that's going to be up to us to tell the stories about the work that we're doing. There was a comment in the chat about having a future session to hear from the actual shelters doing the work, which I think is a great idea, because when you start hearing it from them, the people that are actually doing it, and the energy and excitement around it, I don't think we have to worry about our budgets. We're just having to worry. We don't have anything to worry about. We just need to get the job done.
Yeah, I think it's critically important that we understand that that there's a reason that shelters take in animals hand over fist, and historically were euthanizing hand over fist. That is the cheapest, easiest thing to do for the problems at hand. So when we start doing things that are more complicated, involve more people, it might take more work. And so we need to reallocate the funds that we have that are going towards things that aren't efficiently working towards our end and put them towards this end, but we may find we need more resources, and that's where partnerships become really important, and we need to be leveraging every place we can to make it happen. But it's probably going to be more work than it is to just take them in and not do anything with them.
As we move forward, we're going to be doing more of these webcasts, and we really want to be focusing on the things that you feel like you need to know. As we shared a little earlier, there are so many learning opportunities with HASS, and there are more than 500 teachers involved in this project, and we are all students and we are all teachers. On that note, we're getting ready to wrap up, but before we do, tomorrow I am going to be teaching a group of One Health graduate students about HASS. And if you were in the room with me, I'm quite nervous. And if you were in the room with me and you had to say, what are you doing and why are you doing it? What would you say to those inspired, excited, motivated students who want to change the world? And this is for each of you.
I would say every individual has the capacity to learn, grow, and change. And what are you going to be doing to push yourself on a daily basis as you're taking in information to learn, to grow, and to change so that we can be better today than we were yesterday? And there's so much opportunity out there, because eventually you are going to be standing up front where I, Kristen, am standing.
Well, Kristen, since you're talking about One Health, they are, as the future leaders, going to be in this really unique position to tell the rest of the world that there is this inextricable link between human welfare and animal welfare on all levels. And they're going to have that special understanding and take that with them into the world.
I just think that they get an that they will have an opportunity to make history, because this has never happened before. And being first is pretty cool. So what an exciting thing that they get to do that others that went before them didn't. So it's exciting. It's an adventure.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you guys have all said. And I think I would also hit on that the downside of animal welfare being so neglected as part of our human growth is that we have so much to fix, but the upside is we can fix it. And those people can be the change agents, and they can make that history. And it's when a territory has been already done, like if you've already gotten through making historic change, the changes are small and incremental after that. And right now it's a tidal wave of change that can happen, and they can be responsible for that.
Thank you so much. If you want to learn more, please visit the new Human Animal Support Services webpage. It is brand new. It looks totally different. It's the grown-up version of our website. You can find out about all of our events. You can join everything there and get involved with HASS. We look forward to talking with you more, and we'll see you soon. We're going to be doing these webinars weekly, so please join us anytime you can. And thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much to all of our executive committee. Have a great day, everyone.